Hello. It is Monday, another coffee and dev live stream where we grow as developers and the time it takes to drink a coffee. I have my coffee here in my wonderful Hello Kitty mug. And today we are going to be talking about improving as a developer. It's kind of part of this theme of just building up and improving. So what I want to talk about was this concept of basically, let me just pull over my slide. Think, design, and research before implementing. I'll say that a lot of times you will be working at a company and you will join, and it won't be like a greenlit, like a new project. And you'll be working an existing project. And I think this is why a lot of developers struggle with legacy code bases or code bases that they don't have the context of being there originally. Is everything looks like quote unquote garbage, and everything's so hard to work with. But when you sit down and you actually spend time with the devs, you realize they're not actually diving into a lot of times any of the code. Like they're not going into the inner libraries and seeing why this calls this and how this object's passed and what gets put in it. Usually it's, oh, I went to like story refinement, or story mapping, then story refinement. I got my technical, like my product requirements, and now I'm translating into technical, and I've basically got a solution. And I put this up because these are the blinders of they have a solution in their mind of how they would implement it if it's usually a clean slate or a couple bits and pieces of the code base. And they walk in with that concept in mind, and they show up and they're like, all right, well, I'm just going to try and jam this in here. And what happens is you realize a lot of times midway through you're like, oh, it's a lot more work than I thought I'd be able to access this class doesn't exist over here. Oh, this thing doesn't do what I thought it did. And you have to think, design, and research before implementing, especially if you don't have the context of being there as the project evolved. And it's even more so if it's a code base that has evolved over a long period of time. You know, it might have started as a project that does X on day one, and the business has been evolving for multiple years, 8 years, and that code has been built up upon itself. The answer is not just like nuke it from the sky and start clean slate. What I will say is, I think if you really want to improve on a technical ability, you should be looking at providing drop-in replacements for what you're working on, but improving the code base. A lot of times we try and come in and we're like, everything would be better if we just start from clean slate. Rarely does this happen because of like the existing code bases probably have to have features continue. So you would have to have a team of greater capacity than the original team to be able to keep up with the new features being added on the old platform. Or you need to try and sell the business on, we need to stop all feature development for X amount of times for us to build up a new system to match feature parity plus some. And the thing is, anyone who's gone through this knows that rarely does it ever work, because what happens is the business says yes. And then 3 months into having no feature development and just being like, well, you can't do that until we have the new platform. Eventually, some stakeholder comes in and says, this is garbage. I can't wait anymore. Like, we're losing business value. Like, it'd be better to just maintain the old one and have lower development productivity and have the business grow on the revenue than no revenue growth, because development productivity might increase afterwards, because there's no guarantee. Like, if you didn't quantify and didn't have experiments to show like, hey, we're actually losing productivity on people who work in this code base because of X, then you're guessing that a newer code base will increase productivity. And it's like a false positive, because it will increase productivity, because what happens is, and sometimes it will, obviously, like if the code base is cleaner and better maintained and more readable, then yeah, you're probably going to get productivity gains. But what I usually see is people go off, they do this rewrite. It's not honestly that better. What happens is the productivity increases because everyone just spent 3 months intimately understanding what the old code base does. So when they go to build the new one, they understand the business logic. They understand what's been implemented. They were the ones implementing it. It's not necessarily that the code base is better in terms of readability or the way that the patterns were chosen or the way that the code was written. It's because they wrote it. So being like, oh yeah, that object calls this class and does this, and it's because they wrote it. You would have just been better to just tell everyone to take 3 months, not write any features, and focus on the existing code base of understanding it and finding key spots where you could drop in replacements to improve the code base, than to nuke it from the sky. And I think it shows a great quality or very senior developer. Like some of the top-notch people I've been able to work with have been really excellent at this feature, which is coming in and being able to basically find a way of putting like a drop-in replacement, but improving as they go. So because you have to understand the entire old system to be able to kind of usually come in and say, I'm going to be feature parity with this, but find a way to improve the code base. So if you want to improve as a dev, take this challenge, play within the constraints that you're given, you know, and it's going to help your team and you. So, oh, the next thing I was going to say is divide and conquer. And what I will say is what this is on is more debugging, troubleshooting than anything. I don't know why there is such a huge struggle, usually I see, of people trying to figure out how to move forward on a problem they're stuck, which is weird because the approach I've taken is actually just the same way that you would solve like a technical problem. Like let's say you have something like this tree, right, on this image. It's like, how do we find what we're looking for? Well, you split and you merge, right? And you're basically going down until you get to the bottom. And then is this my answer? No. Okay, compute whatever I need up to the next node and go down to the next one, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I tackle the technical problems. Is you pick a point in time of your problem, and you're going to basically work backwards and confirm all your assumptions or eliminate whatever is behind that. So a good example I could give you is actually last week. Is we had a project that would work on local dev box, but wouldn't work when we put it on Kubernetes, and we were trying to debug why this was. And I just picked a point in time and was like, all right, so I'm going to assume, like, I know the difference here is the development box versus like in the Kubernetes cluster, and like what are the possibilities of that could be different. And one of them was DNS. So I start there and I worked all the way back. Like, what are my assumptions? Like, oh, maybe it's because the way that we have this Java application is not using the host DNS resolver. So it's not getting the DNS record. Okay, so how do we figure that out? And you just like you ask yourself, like, is there any other ways to determine this? And for me, it was like, well, there's many. I can go to the thing that we're calling and see if I can see the request going on that side. I can see if there's other things that are getting called that would use DNS resolution. Are they still working? Yeah. Okay. Can I go onto the container in Kubernetes and see if DNS resolution is working? Oh, it's working there. So I know that the pod on Kubernetes has DNS resolution. Great. So I know that it's not the pod on Kubernetes as an issue. So everything from that point back is solved. So what else is running on there? Well, our Docker container is running within that pod. So maybe it's the way that our application is written. Maybe it's missing something. And you're just eliminating, you have a point in time that you're eliminating back from, and you're finding out if your assumptions are correct or not correct. You never move forward from that spot until you've confirmed that everything back with great confidence has been eliminated. Because if you're just guessing all over the place, what happens is you're mixing results. You might be changing settings at one point that's going to give you a false positive, or you think it's this because you've changed something else. You need to have a process. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to copy and paste this over here, and then I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try a different thing. Yeah, but did you remove your copy and paste? No? Then you've introduced something new. So you might have actually finally hit a solution that would have solved your original problem, but because you've done so many different things, you've introduced a secondary problem. And it just wastes a lot of time. And time is valuable as a dev, and being able to unblock yourself in a reasonable amount of time is extremely valuable, right? It's also great because you're able to sit down with someone else when they're stuck and be like the same thing. Divide and conquer, like split and merge. Pick a point in time. For us, it was container doesn't work. We know it works on local, so I'm going to ignore that. We know it doesn't work on Kubernetes. Great. Now, what's the difference between those two? Okay, DNS, and we go down that path. And the ironic thing is, I never got a solution because eventually I got to the end of DNS and I was able to actually see the requests leaving from our application with proper DNS resolution. But now I know it's not DNS because I've eliminated all the possibilities. So it's something else somewhere. But now I've eliminated that. So now I can move on to the next thing, which is, in this case, it's something like, oh, the JDBC driver that we're using is a different version from the application we're calling. Maybe that's introducing some sort of issue. And how could this happen on the Kubernetes cluster versus our local? Well, our local might be caching some sort of jar, and they published a new jar, and prod's pulling the new jar, and that has a bug, right? So now you go down that path. How would we figure that out? Well, on our local, we can clear the cache. Now we can try and mimic and pull the latest jar. Now, are they both running the same jar? Yeah. Does the problem still exist? Etc. So what I'll say is, the simplest explanation is usually the best one until proven otherwise. So don't go crazy complicated, being like, oh, maybe it's because of this weird thing down here, or blah, blah. Like, all I had started with was something as simple as maybe DNS resolution doesn't work. And then from there, I built upon and had assumptions, and I was eliminating those assumptions. Like, oh, is it the way that our application is built? No. Is it the way that the resolver works in the container? No. Okay. Is it blah blah blah? No. Okay. And then I pulled out like strace, so it's a tool, and I was able to actually like listen and see. Hey, look, no, my application successfully resolves that DNS to the thing that we want. I see the IP, it's the correct IP. I see the request go out. Boom. DNS resolution is not the issue. So what's the next explanation? Well, the next simplest explanation is we're running the wrong versions, or the JDBC driver we have has a bug. Okay, let's go down that path. I'm not going like, ooh, maybe there's some random bits that flip, or we found like an OS kernel network bug, and who knows? Like, whoa, that's way too far down the rabbit hole. Like, don't go down the rabbit hole until you've started eliminating down the hole. Like, you have to have a reasonable explanation for all the other simple things before you start having this more complex one. And honestly, that's it for today. Improving as a developer is one day at a time, step by step. And this coffee and dev was more about just getting you to have different perspectives of how you're approaching your problems, taking a step back before you write your code. Code isn't everything. You need to spend the time, research, ask others, ask yourself, what would be the best approach here given the constraints I have and the time I have? And then the rest is making sure that you don't get caught up on going down a rabbit hole and sinking a lot of time. So better debugging techniques. Make sure you have your Google Kung Fu searches up to par so you're able to find the information you need very easily. And until next time, this is Coffee and Dev with my Hello Kitty mug and plenty of coffee. See you on Friday.